Hey, seventh grade, welcome back. Haven't seen my face in a while, I know. Um, so, ecology lecture time. Go ahead and get the lecture slides pulled up. Um, it is Thursday. Yes, it's Thursday. Sorry, I record this stuff ahead of time, so I have to think what day it is for you. Anyway, so your warm up says, what is the difference between a producer and a consumer? You probably know this. It's really easy. I'll give you a second. Pause the video if you need more time. Do 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 do. Okay, so the difference between a producer and a consumer. A producer, by its name, produces its own food, like a plant. Consumers consume those things. They consume producers. They can't make their own food. So we are examples of consumers because we don't do photosynthesis or anything, right? No. We just need to eat other things to get our energy. These terms have to deal with how these organisms get their energy, whether they can make it for themselves or not. And that's tying into everything we're doing today. So, as I said, this is about ecology. It's kind of a review. This is to help you for when we get to eventual state standardized testing. It's stuff you need to know. Um, we have touched through this kind of stuff this year, but I just want to make sure we know. So, ecology, next slide, is defined as the study of living organisms and their interactions with the environment. Basically, take any organism that lives in an environment, whether it is a fungus, a plant, an animal, a human, well, we're animals, but anything like that and how it interacts with the environment. So take a whale living in the ocean, how it interacts with the other little creatures all around the ocean, like what does it eat, what eats it. We just talked about symbiotic relationships and how things like barnacles can live on the whale. All of that. So, the first one we're going to talk about are producers. And as we said in our warm up, producers are things that make their own food. They're also known as autotrophs. The most common example that we can think of with producers are plants. They photosynthesize. Remember, back all the way to chapter 2. Photosynthesis is the process in which plants make their own food. They take in water and light and carbon dioxide and output it into energy for themselves in the form of sugar and oxygen that we breathe. So we all rely on each other, right? These are all cycles. Another example of producers that is not on the slide, things like cyanobacteria or phytoplankton in the ocean. Believe it or not, a lot of the Earth's oxygen comes from phytoplankton. They're little single-celled organisms that live in the ocean, and they photosynthesize. Thank you, phytoplankton, for giving us oxygen. Okay, so next slide is about consumers. Consumers are anything that cannot make their own energy, or make their own food, for lack of a better word. So they have to eat other things. Either they eat producers, usually these are herbivores, they only eat plants, or they can eat other consumers. They're carnivore or omnivore. Examples of herbivores are all plant eaters, like a giraffe is an herbivore, but it's still a consumer because Mr. Giraffe can't make his own food, right? He has to eat all the leaves and stuff up in the trees. He's eating the producers, the trees. An example of a consumer that is an omnivore, remember we learned about bears. Bears eat both meat and plants. So some producers that they would eat are the berries or whatever other little plants that the bears like to forage for. But we know that other bears do eat meat, like a grizzly bear. Grizzly? Yes, grizzly bears eat fish, they eat salmon. So they're eating other consumers because a fish can't make its own food. It gets its food from plants. So consumers can eat just producers, consumers can eat just other consumers, or it can do both. Herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. The last one, last type of organism in our lecture today is decomposers. And just by their name, they decompose things. They break down dead or dying organic material and put nutrients and stuff back into the soil. An example of these are mushrooms or any other fungus. Mushrooms, quite commonly, you see them like on the ground in the forest or wherever. And what they do is they have the ability to break down organic material. So let's say a plant died next to it. The plant will start to rot and break down, and the decomposer helps it do so. And in doing that, there are several cycles and other little organisms, usually in the form of bacteria, that help return nutrients to the soil, to the air. However, it's all one giant cycle. So if you look at the slide 7, you'll see trophic levels, and this is where they all play off on each other. All these different herbivores and consumers and producers and all these things that I've been talking about. So you'll see trophic level. Its definition is the hierarchy, that's a fancy word, or the level of organisms in an ecosystem based on how they get their energy. It's like the food chain. So if you look at the diagram, you'll see plants are on the bottom of this diagram. Those are the producers. They get their energy from the sun and making all their own food. They're usually the biggest group. Then there's a separation, and the next whole subsection is all consumers. This diagram has divided it into herbivores and predators. It could just be consumers as well. So herbivores, we know, eat plants. They only eat plants by definition. Then above them are predators and top predators. You might also see that written as apex predators. These types of consumers eat the herbivores. Then, after all that, as they decompose, as they all eventually die off, we know the circle of life. They get decomposed, they break down, the decomposers help get all that material back down into the soil or air or water, whatever, for the plants to use again. And this whole thing starts over. You'll see on the right-hand side that there is an arrow with energy pointing up the pyramid, and that's showing how energy cycles through an entire ecosystem. So it starts with a plant. It takes in its energy from the sun, makes it into energy for itself. Then that energy in the plant is eaten by an herbivore. That herbivore turns the energy, the sugar from the plant, into energy it needs to live. Then the herbivore gets eaten. Say the bunny got eaten by the wolf. Then the wolf takes the energy from the bunny, and then eventually the wolf will die, and its body will get broken down. The decomposers recycle everything back. So it's a giant cycle. We talked about life cycles at the beginning of the year. And it just shows you how the energy moves through the food chain. So if we look at the trophic level analysis slide, you'll see a picture of the food chain. In this example, we have some flowers that get eaten by frogs, and the frogs get eaten by the snake, and then the snake gets eaten by the owl. We don't have a decomposer in this picture, but that's fine. So, excuse me, let's identify the producers in this picture. Take a second. There's only one, the flower. The flower is the producer. So let's identify the consumers. Take a second. If you said frog, snake, and owl, you are correct. Yay! Okay, So when we look at this, any change to an ecosystem would harm or help any organism, right? So let's look at the flowers, and let's say there's a drought and all these flowers die. How sad. Or there's just less of them because they can't grow because there's no water. So there's less and less flowers, which means, let's say for that frog, that type of frog, that species, this is the only thing they eat. If that's their only food supply, these frogs are going to have to fight to get their flower food, right? There's going to be a lot of competition. Only the strongest frogs are going to get it. They're going to have to beat each other up and get their food. Now, there's only so much to go around. So even if you're the strongest, you're eventually going to run out, right? So let's say there's a cataclysmic event in which these flowers never grow again. And this means that the frog population is going to die unless they find a new food source. So, if the frog population eventually dies, the snake population, by logic, will also suffer because one of their food sources is gone. But in this imaginary ecosystem, snakes eat more than just frogs. They eat the wild mouse that's running around too. So they might just have to change their diet. So any organism that's affected can affect all the other organisms. Let's think about a way that it can positively affect an ecosystem to a certain degree. Let's say all of the snakes they migrated. They left the area. Maybe there was a low frog population one year. So they left the area to go somewhere else to find food. And now, in this new year, there are less snakes around, if any. They eat these frogs. What's going to happen is that there's nothing to keep the frog population in check, and it's going to boom. It's going to grow a lot, and something will need to be introduced into the ecosystem to help these frogs, because to help keep the frog population in check. Because if not, we know that if there are lots and lots of things and not enough resources, just like there's lots of people buying toilet paper right now, the less other people or less flowers other frogs will get, and then you'd end up in the problem that we were just looking at with the flowers dying out. So the food chain exists to keep everything in check. Everything's at its own trophic level to keep the ecosystem in balance. All right. So if you have any questions about how this all works, please email me, or you can use the Teams function, chat function, and message me there as well. So your homework, answer the questions on that document and email them to me. If you open it up, it's just another example food web. That's what we call it, food web, of different organisms in an ecosystem. And go ahead and answer the questions. The last one's more of an open-ended question. It's probably a couple sentences. The other ones are pretty easy. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.